this is Pamela Smythe from the University of Waterloo. I'm one of the hosts of Beyond the Bulletin, the podcast of internal communications at the university. We bring you news and views from the U-Waterloo community. Please spread the word that we're on SoundCloud.com or wherever you get your podcasts. And now the interview from episode 152 of Beyond the Bulletin, originally broadcast on April 14th, 2023. Social media makes it easy to share information, but with this access comes the proliferation of misinformation and disinformation. The COVID-19 pandemic appears to have fed a lack of trust in science and sometimes the scientists. Waterloo is home to a new multidisciplinary research network to build trust in science and technology. It's a first in Canada. Arts professor Ashley Mehlenbacher is Canada Research Chair in Science, Health and Technology Information, along with Donna Strickland, Professor of Physics and Nobel Laureate. She's an inaugural director of the new network. Here she is with more. Ashley, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Now, you're an expert on the way communication affects the way people engage with and respond to science and technology. What do you think's behind all the misinformation and disinformation that we've seen since the start of the pandemic in particular?
There are many contributing factors to who creates disinformation, how that spreads online. And that ranges really from, with disinformation, intentionally spreading bad faith or bad content. And that might be to erode trust, to polarize, or for some other kind of malicious intent. There's also accidental spreading of misinformation. There's misinformation that's maybe generated from a misunderstanding of evidence or a misreading of evidence. And we're all susceptible to spreading misinformation or believing it. So it's a problem we all have a lot of investment in. And I think we all need to be attentive to. There's no real singular reason that it's spreading, but I think all of these factors are contributing to what we're seeing today.
What is it that interests you about this topic?
I'm broadly interested in how communication shapes science. And that ranges really from its beginnings, the kind of knowledge-producing work of science within fields, to the broader conversations that we might say are shared with non-specialists. But my interest is really driven by a belief that how we communicate, studying our rhetorical lives can help us live better. And what I mean by that is it can help us produce better science, better knowledge, and it can also help us understand how to use that knowledge and make sure that's inclusive and helping everybody's lives.
You, along with Donna Strickland, Professor of Physics, as well as Nobel Laureate, of course, launched a new research network. You are co-directors. What's the mandate?
We can call it the Trust Network for short. It's the trust in research undertaken in science and technology. So the Trust Network is really a network of researchers dedicated to better understanding why people do or don't trust scientific and technical information. We know there are high levels of trust, as a recent CAN Trust Index survey showed, in many fields that would be relevant to this, or areas, domain sectors. So we know, for example, there's high trust in the Canadian healthcare system and medical doctors and scientists, but there are some declines that have been noteworthy over the last few years, and that includes those groups and also public health officials and the WHO. So this trend is one that suggests we should be looking and thinking about this concept of trust in these domains. I think what the studies show is that among the different sectors that we might measure trust in, there is a reasonably high level of trust. Now, again, that has been declining, so it's something that we certainly want to pay attention to. And I think the one way we can really think about that is, how do we continually try to earn trust, right? So what is the kind of work we can be doing to support the various people who need to be able to trust in these various sectors or institutions or groups?
How did it start?
Donna Strickland and Mary Wells, the Dean of Engineering, were having some conversations, and I was brought into these conversations. So at that point, we really started to think about how we might frame some of the questions and what the areas are that we want to look at or study. And we put together a proposal for some internal funding. And from there, we were able to secure a little bit of funding to start, really the network in earnest. And so that we really launched in January of 2023. And we've been sort of building the foundations since then and expanding the network to include every faculty at the university and kind of growing out from there.
Why is it important that this in particular be interdisciplinary?
I suppose, interesting ways that trust is a concept to be studied is that, you have a lot of fields that have already been studying these sorts of issues for a very long time. So if you take my own field, I'm a rhetorical scholar. So I work in rhetorical studies. A lot of it's really thinking about how we are able to identify with one another, communicate with one another in democratic spheres. So researchers in rhetoric, there's subfields called the rhetoric of science, technology, and medicine. They've looked at a lot of these issues before. Now, there are other fields that have done this too, right? So there's science, technology, society studies, psychologists, obviously, right? Economists. So we have all kinds of fields and researchers working on these sorts of problems. But bringing them together is productive in that it brings a lot of different advantages to how we can study this question. Because the question is really complex, right? It's what's sometimes referred to as a wicked problem. So there's no singular answer. There's no really even singular way to pose the problem. So having a number of different perspectives provides us a lot of the component parts we need to understand what's going on. It's a big issue, we know, so we think it's really important to study this in a number of ways. So we're really bringing a kind of transdisciplinary approach or a beyond discipline. So really kind of pulling from all kinds of different fields to understand the concepts, the ways to study it, and some of the challenges we might face.
Are you looking at the reasons why trust is on the decline?
That's absolutely one of the questions that we're asking and interested in exploring.
What else are you interested in exploring?
We're in fairly early stages of the network, so we have research questions that we're interested in. We're also interested in looking at kind of pragmatic applications. So, for example, how might we work with teachers to talk about some of the challenges that our students are facing as they come through, high school and then into university. We're interested in various kinds of outreach. So these are still, as I said, early stages, but citizen science projects and those sorts of things where we can really kind of engage folks in the process of science and think about how we can make that perhaps more transparent or talk about that method and process. And I think understanding how that works and why it changes, why findings change, why study design changes, how science changes over time with new understanding is part of the goal that we're really working with.
Is the network also trying to build trust in science and technology?
Well, we do want to know why people don't trust. We also want to know how do you earn trust and, importantly, how do you sustain that trust? So as opposed to thinking about it as, trying to get folks just sort of on board with whatever the science or technology is, it's really more about a kind of relational comportment where we're interested in that kind of conversation about how the people who will be affected are understanding whatever the topic is, the situation, what other factors we might be missing.
I would think that maybe there are some people who have some very firm views who maybe think that the whole point of this is to dismiss them or tell them what to think.
That's, I think, a real concern that people have. And I think that's part of any time you talk about something like disinformation or misinformation, trust in science, these are in some ways already contentious and polarizing topics. So there's some controversy around them. So when we think about the kind of work we're undertaking, we're absolutely attentive to that. And what we really want to do is think about these questions broadly, not with any specific group in mind or any specific subject. Now, obviously, particular research studies will look at specific topics, for example, but the goal really of the network as a whole is to understand broadly this question of trust, and that applies to everybody. So it's not just folks who maybe don't trust the institutions, and it's not folks who maybe feel that they're characterized as spreading misinformation, but it's we're all susceptible to this, and we all need to understand how to better vet the kind of information and content we're seeing, how to critically evaluate what it is we believe, what we think, and why we think that. So our goal is really to provide those kinds of tools, not to tell people what to think.
How will you get the public interested and involved?
When we think about engagement, I think that really depends on the subject. So there are folks who may be skeptical in one domain who aren't in another. And I think in those cases, they'd probably find alignments with what we're doing if they're willing to chat with us. But I think there are probably those conversations that are just going to be so polarizing it might be off-putting to some people, and it's very difficult to engage if there's already that kind of polarization. So one of the goals is to really figure out how to have conversations without that kind of polarizing framing so that we can understand each other better and understand where concerns come from.
As we said in the intro, this is the first research network of its kind in Canada. What has reaction been?
The reaction has been overwhelming, I might say. So there's a lot of interest in this topic, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean it in folks are really invested, really serious, really hopeful in the kind of work that can be done. So I'm actually on sabbatical right now, so I've been able to field a lot of these emails and meetings, but there's among academics, among nonprofits and other sectors, there's a lot of interest in the subject. And I think that appetite for it sort of speaks to what a lot of folks want to do, which really is striving to earn trust in ethically committed ways to really help people. So those are a lot of the conversations that I've been having lately.
How many researchers do you have affiliated now?
Right now, we're growing quite rapidly, and we're centering in some ways around beginning at Waterloo, the University of Waterloo, and we have researchers from every faculty at this point. We don't have any studies underway yet. We definitely have several conversations happening, thinking about the kinds of work we're going to do, and we're beginning to map out some of that work. We have, however, started other kinds of projects related to the network. So we recently attended a local high school and met with several, I think around 20 science and English teachers, and had a wonderful conversation, sort of collaborative conversation about how we can think about information seeking behaviors, how we talk about misinformation, the kinds of challenges our students are facing. And I think those kinds of conversations are incredibly productive for us understanding how the students that are going to be coming to the university, but also how we can really kind of collaborate across institutions to develop resources to support those students.
I would think there would be researchers from other institutions and maybe even government who want to participate or partner.
Absolutely. And I am starting to have some of those conversations. So we don't have anything firm yet, but there are definitely there's a lot of cross-pollination across sectors and institutions that I think will be very productive going forward as we kind of begin to pin things down.
What are researchers saying as they're joining?
The conversations that I've been having a lot are around different ways we might collaborate and think about projects that folks have been undertaking and maybe have aspects of that involve trust or some of these issues that we're dealing with. So in some ways, I think it's what the network can really facilitate is bringing those conversations that are maybe being held in a bunch of different places into conversation with one another. So, we don't want to reinvent the wheel here, right? So where we can pull those conversations together, maybe help support that and turn it into a larger conversation with, more folks, more support, more resources. I think that's one of the goals that we have is really that kind of collaborative sort of energy. There's a lot of folks who have been doing really interesting work and thinking on this. So it's exciting to see the possibilities for what we might, jump into and participate in.
Is there anything else we need to know, Ashley?
First major event that I think might interest folks is part of a speaker series that we're developing. So we're still working out all of the details, but it'll be launched in early September. And we're really excited about this because it allows for not only the speaker sort of series itself, but I think conversations around that and the conversations it'll generate. So that's kind of our big event that we're looking forward to in the fall. But we're also looking forward to continuing some of that work that we've started, such as collaborating with teachers, getting some of the research projects. As I said, they're not quite in progress yet, but they're conversations and really kind of moving towards those.
Are there any other points you'd like to make, Ashley, before we close today?
I guess I would just recap that, we're in the very early stages of the network. And while we're running really hard to kind of get things set up, we're very excited to develop various kinds of collaborations across sectors and build the network. So if you're working in this area, definitely reach out to me. And we also really want to emphasize, the upcoming speaker series. And I think it'll be a really productive, generative series of conversations. So we're really hoping that folks will engage with that.
Well, it sounds like you have a lot of important, difficult work ahead of you, and I'll let you get on with it. So thank you so much for being here, Ashley. It was a pleasure speaking with you, as always.
Well, thank you for having me, Pamela.
Thank you for listening to this interview from the Beyond the Bulletin podcast from the University of Waterloo. You'll find our archive of full episodes on the University of Waterloo website. Select interviews are on the university's YouTube channel. Just look for our playlist there. Please join Brandon Sweet and me for new episodes, and don't forget to tell your Waterloo connections about us.